Welcome back to the Explanation Pro. Today I'll recap an extraordinary true story, war, thriller film called Gold Run. Spoilers incoming. 6 months into World War II, Nazi forces were about to encroach on Norway's territory in the middle of springtime. They planned to control the Norwegian coast, the kingdom, the government, and the gold reserves sealed in major banks. It is April 8, 1940, a night before the Nazi invasion of Oslo. Norwegian Labour Party Secretary Fredrik Hasland and his wife, Irene, are preparing a cake to celebrate the birthday of their daughter, Veslemøy. They soon entertain the last set of guests for the party, Fredrik's sister, Nini Hasland Gleditsch, and her family. With everyone complete, they start singing a Norwegian birthday song while the cake is brought to the dinner table. Suddenly, an alert for a bombing raid is heard outside the home, prompting Fredrik to lead everyone inside the underground shelter, pausing the celebration. While waiting, Veslemøy requests a small toy bear she left at the dinner table, which her Aunt Nini happily retrieves, along with the lit-up birthday cake. They ultimately decide to continue the party in the cellar. The following day, a radio broadcast informs the general public of the timeline of events since the Nazi invasion of the coastlines. While this plays out, Norges Bank Governor Nikolai Rygg orders staff to take out crates filled with gold to empty the vault before the Germans arrive. He calls for an ordinary bank clerk, Ingvar Berge, to procure trucks to transport the gold to the central bank. Despite his lack of skills in dealing with these emergency situations, he has no choice but to obey. Meanwhile, Fredrik readies to leave for the office while asking his family to wait for him so that they can flee to a remote cabin in Mila. Irene is hesitant to see him go, as it is not his responsibility to take over the documentation, but her husband insists on his duty to the country. Outside Oslo, in the forests of Drobak, stranded Nazi commander Major Otto Stoltmann hitches a ride to town on a local couple's vehicle. He informs them that his ship sunk during a fierce battle and that he must reach the central bank to reunite with the surviving regiment. Meanwhile, Fredrik arrives at the Labour Party head office, where each staff member frantically shows him files that will either get eviscerated or kept for safekeeping. During the inspection, he is phoned by Finance Minister Oscar Torp, who enlists him as a getaway driver to flee from the Germans. He then rushes home to inform his family about the change of plans but sees a letter Irene left telling him they left for the cabin without him. Catching his breath while eating an olive, he picks up Veslemøy's toy teddy bear and brings it with him. In another part of town, a local truck driver, Odd Henry, catches Ingvar inspecting his vehicle and beats him up, thinking he is a thief. The nervous clerk shows a letter explaining that he will hire him to carry the bank's gold reserves to Lillihammer Central Bank. After the pair drives to the Norges Central Bank, Ingvar reports his success to Rygg as Nazi aerial fighters swarm the skies. On another part of town, renowned theater actor and poet Nordahl Grieg is interrupted by the marching German soldiers outside the dentist's office in the middle of his teeth cleaning. Clearly distressed with the lack of mobilization from Norwegian troops, he leaves to enlist in the Norwegian army at Jorstadmoen military camp. At the Evacuation Commission office, the head manager informs Nini and the staff they will disband and leave the city immediately since the government has failed to support them. Suddenly, a bombing raid begins, prompting Rygg to hand over the responsibility of protecting the gold cargo to Ingvar and giving him a gun for protection. The hesitant clerk is entirely bewildered by the situation, so Odd Henry forces him to ride in the back of his truck and follow orders. After all the vehicles leave, Major Stoltmann and his unit arrive at Norges Bank, ready to confront the bank governor about the gold. After coaxing him for the key to unlocking the vault, the major becomes disappointed when he sees it emptied out. Meanwhile, a nervous Fredrik picks up Oscar and another colleague from the ministry as they discuss the success of the first phase of the transport. Simultaneously, Odd Henry's cargo truck is halted by stranded civilians who try to board his vehicle, only for Ingvar to point a gun at them and scare them away. By late afternoon, Fredrik and his group hear the news about a German envoy informing the foreign ministry head that Norway must submit to German militarization. As night falls in Lillihammer, the convoy of transport trucks arrives. The men immediately unload the gold reserves and take them inside the bank before manager Andreas Lund seals the vault. Meanwhile, Fredrik arrives safely at a government-appointed safe house in Odda, where he has difficulty finding a telephone to contact his loved ones at the cabin. After spending the night sleeping on the sofa, he is awakened by Oscar and told to leave with him right away. During the drive, the finance minister gives him the responsibility to take all the gold reserves out of the country, even though he must pull them out of the vault in Lillihammer Central Bank, despite not being authorized to do so. Once there, he gives him a letter certifying him as the commanding officer for the mission while also telling him the gold needs to be transported as far as the west coast of Andalsnes, where British naval troops are waiting. Despite his newly appointed position, Mr. Lund fails to trust his word, demanding Governor Rygg's consent before he can start registering any of the gold crates. Unbeknownst to the pair, Rygg is continually interrogated by Major Stoltmann on the whereabouts of the gold. Though the governor is tight-lipped on the subject, the Nazi official eventually gets informed by two young Nazi loyalists about the gold transport to Lillehammer. Meanwhile, Nini visits Fredrik at the bank and tells him about becoming a volunteer for the resistance movement. He anxiously tells his sister about the mission, feeling unprepared for it. Nini joins in, believing she is a valuable asset as she has previous wartime experience and can speak many languages, including English, which will help contact the British forces ahead of time. Later, after Frederick prepares the inventory sheets, the Norwegian army, led by Major Bjorn Sunde, arrives at Lillihammer station and proceeds to the bank, acting as a military escort for the gold transport. Though still at odds with Mr. Lund over authority, he gets help from Major Sunde to convince the bank manager to open the vault. With the threat of getting shot for insubordination, Mr. Lund is given no choice but to open it, even if he misremembers the lock combination. Despite thanking Major Sunde for assistance, he makes it clear that he must follow his orders for the mission. Knowing the Germans will arrive any time, the Major attempts to speed up the process by planting explosive charges around the vault door should the manager fail to remember the combination. Frederick asks the unit to hold off on the order so that he can guide Mr. Lund and shake off his anxiety. After a brief pep talk, the manager finally unlocks the vault, allowing the troops to load all the crates on the transport vehicles. They are assisted by Ingvar and Odd Henry, who were accidentally left behind after not returning to the city for evacuation. Almost immediately, the gold is transported to the Lillehammer train station, but before loading the crates inside the containers, Frederick inspects them one by one for inventory purposes. This process concerns Major Sunde, believing it is consuming too much time and may result in the German forces catching up to them. He then assigns Odd Henry and Ingvar as vanguards to report German paratrooper activity, forcing the pair to undertake the mission on a railcart. Later, with everything accounted for, Mr. Lund signs the documentation, and the train heads off to NÄZl. He returns to the bank and faces a disappointed Major Stoltman inside the empty vault. The following day, Odd Henry and Ingvar stop over a bridgeway to inspect a fallen German paratrooper. As the former examines the man, he is revealed to be alive and tries strangling Odd Henry, only for the paratrooper to drop an ignited explosive, killing him. The explosion is heard by Frederick and the military escort, along with a group of Norwegian resistance fighters who rescue Odd Henry and Ingvar and return them to the train. Later, the group stops under a tunnel to hide from passing German fighter planes and enthuses Nordahl in explaining what inspired him to become a soldier. Meanwhile, Stoltman has discovered the train's destination and reports that they must get to the coast of Moor to intercept the gold and avoid bombing the British naval vessels. As another day passes, the train arrives at a station filled with troops. Frederick is surprised to see Nini at the platform, as she has successfully alerted the British forces about the mission, securing the area from the Germans. After she climbs aboard, the train proceeds to NÄZl, where a ship, Galatea, awaits to load the gold reserves. Upon arriving, Frederick repeats the registration process before any crate is loaded in the boat, much to Major Sunde's impatience. However, during the inventory process, a team of German aerial bombers flies across the area, forcing the unit to return the unloaded crates inside the train containers and retreat. After Frederick gets the ship captain's signature, he takes the documents and runs for cover as the planes shoot down and destroy the harbor. The attack is so intense that one of the containers gets hit and explodes. The group takes cover as the train runs backward away from the port. Nini tries comforting a terrified Ingvar as everyone waits for the planes to leave. Returning to Romsdalshorn station, the unit steps off the train and hurriedly puts out the blazing fire from one of the containers while saving a bruised Odd Henry. Major Sunde angrily confronts Frederick, believing it is his fault for delaying their transport by meticulously following government protocol instead of thinking about the welfare of the troops. After the smoke clears, Nini is informed via phone call that the British forces have moved on elsewhere, so she must leave to find their next location. She then talks to her brother privately, counseling him in his struggle to lead the military unit while undertaking the mission to keep all of Norway's gold safe. She advises him to keep fighting for the country and his family before giving him the number to their safe house. He tries calling, but no one answers, so he believes his family has fled somewhere safer. By nightfall, Nini, with Nordahl's help, delivers baskets of cod to feed the troops before bidding goodbye to Frederick to depart to Molde and meet with the central government officials and retrieve the sealed paper currency. As she leaves, Nordahl commends her efforts, saying she had always been that way since their time in the Spanish Civil War. During supper, Odd Henry tells Ingvar they are fortunate to be alive after the attack. The next morning, Frederick gets a call from the British forces, telling him that a vessel, the HMS Glasgow, can transport the gold in Molde while waiting for the king to arrive. Major Sunde orders the troops to load the cargo into several vehicles but becomes frustrated when Frederick resumes inventory. The secretary stands, giving a rousing speech to boost morale, but it does not convince the major. Nordahl then speaks, uttering his own words of encouragement, which inspire Major Sunde and allow the registration to continue. Afterward, as German forces track their location, the troops leave in their respective vehicles for Molde. After a few challenging bumps on the road, Frederick's bus arrives at the pier, where the major loads it on the ferry. Suddenly, Major Stoltman's forces arrive and shoot at the group right as Odd Henry and Ingvar arrive late due to car trouble. Both sides return fire as the ferry leaves the dock with everyone on board. Stoltman watches from afar as a German bomber plane targets the ferry, although he orders it to hold fire to keep the gold reserves intact, much to Frederick and the group's relief. After reuniting with the convoy, the group travels to a decimated mole, as German troops have arrived ahead of time. Frederick reunites with Nini, and the registration process continues before the crates are loaded on the HMS Glasgow. There are a number of crates registered when the King of Norway arrives, accompanied by Oscar, who informs Frederick they must continue transporting the gold by other means. The ship leaves right as German planes bomb the harbor area. Frederick rushes to Nini, who is trying to unlock the door to the bank storing the paper currency. After destroying the door with a tree trunk, the pair and some volunteers hurriedly carry all the crates out to the loading trucks while Ingvar does the registration process. Just as the dock is bombarded with heavy fire, Odd Henry saves the clerk from getting hit, sacrificing himself. Before dying, he commends Ingvar for coming out of his shell and becoming a courageous man. Meanwhile, Frederick notices an oil container nearby getting encroached by the flames, forcing him to speed up in carrying the last remaining crate. It explodes as soon as the pair retreat to the corner street. Fortunately, all the crates with the paper currency are safe. As dawn breaks, Frederick and Nina return to reunite with the unit and say goodbye to Odd Henry, who succumbed to his injuries. They continue the gold transport to a harbor in Tetran, Froya. Upon arriving, Nordahl tries to make pleasantries with the locals, though he fails as they believe they are German invaders. Frederick woefully explains their situation to the local harbormaster, who agrees to help. Soon after, the townsfolk gather to assist in inventory of the gold crates, carrying them into a fisherman's yacht. Later, after casting out into the sea, the Nazi bomber carrying Major Stadelmann swoops down to survey the area. The officer becomes disheartened as he finds difficulty spotting Frederick's ship with many other fishing boats at sea. He accepts defeat and retreats back to Germany to face the consequences. After the plane leaves, the Norwegians come out of hiding and silently celebrate their victory. Nini informs Frederick that his family has fled to Sweden and is safe. Meanwhile, Nordahl approaches the captain to indulge him in listening to his patriotic poem about their triumph over impossible odds. After reciting it proudly, the captain is moved to tears, feeling inspired by his words. As the boat continues its journey, Frederick smiles in relief. The crew transported the remaining 18 tons of gold to Tromsø on May 9, 1940. From there, it was loaded on another British naval vessel, the HMS Enterprise, which set sail for England. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and also subscribe my channel for more videos like this. See you in the next video.